everyone, it's Alice, and today we are doing part 2 of talking about specific things that I really like in books. I did a video like this a little while ago, and I mentioned that I actually have a lot of these things where if I read it on the back of the book or I hear that a book has a certain kind of thing in it that is kind of specific, I'm immediately interested in reading that book. And it could really be anything, but I have a lot of these things that I really like in stories and in books, and it's just fun to talk about. So we're doing part 2 today, and honestly we might have to do a part 3 at some point because the more I think about this, the more of these things I come up with. Anyways, I'm sure you get the idea, and today I do have like a mix of things, and some of these things are like, people are very different with their tastes in books, of course, and some of the things that I really love I know some people loathe in books, so it will be interesting to discuss, but especially this first one, I know some people really don't like it, but I love it when it's done well, and it's when a book has an unlikable but fascinating main character. I think for some readers, unlikable characters just aren't that interesting to them, and that's totally fair, but I kind of love them. Not always, like, there has to be a certain depth to the character for me to be interested in them, but to me, I just think there is something fascinating about horrible people. The first book I have with this in it is actually a book in Norwegian, but this does have an English translation as well. It's Mannen som ikke var morder by Hjort Rosenfeldt. The English title of this is Dark Secrets, and this is a Nordic noir mystery about this teenage boy who is found brutally murdered, and the detectives that are working on the case are dismayed when an old colleague of theirs gets involved in the investigation. He is a psychologist and criminal profiler and like a top expert in his field, but he is unfortunately also a grade A asshole. Not only is the story and the mystery in here really good, but the main character, like the psychologist, really is absolutely insufferable. Like, he is horrible, but he is also annoyingly clever, and he is really good at his job. So it was interesting in this book to sort of see the other characters try to like put up with him for him to be able to help them, but he's just like, every step of the way he is the worst, and he has no problem like rubbing salt in your wounds if he's smarter than you, and he's just horrible. But throughout the book we also do get to learn a little bit about his backstory, which I think adds a lot of dimension to his character. And as a reader who really likes these kinds of dark mysteries and unlikable main characters, this was kind of perfect for me. Also, I think that I mention this every time I talk about this book, but the very last page of this story made me gasp. Like, I was just alone in my apartment reading in peace, and I was so shocked, and it was so good. Secondly, we have Boy Parts by Eliza Clarke, which is contemporary fiction, and I guess it's technically also horror. And this follows a female photographer who takes explicit photos of very average-looking men, and she's kind of obsessed with it. And the story sort of takes off when she gets an exhibition at this fashionable gallery in London, and this is huge for her career, but it also sends her into a tailspin and into like a self-destructive spiral, and they go off the rails a little bit. I remember when I finished this book that I felt like I both liked and disliked this book in equal measure. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I still think about this book. It's an interesting character study of a woman who is unlikable and a little unhinged, and there is like an underlying dark humor to this book that is very interesting. And I guess I can say that I liked this book, but it also feels wrong to say that. This is also one of the few books I've read that has an unlikable character that is a woman, and I would like to read more of these kinds of books. I think that these kinds of books can be a little bit hit or miss, probably. I don't like all unlikable characters that I've ever read about, but in here I just thought the main character was very interesting. So if anyone has any recommendations that are kind of like this, let me know, because I think I would like to read more, because I do think about this book a lot. Then we have Perfume by Patrick Süskind, which is a historical fiction horror book. This follows a boy who is born in 18th century France in the slums, and he is born with an incredible sense of smell. And this eventually leads him to become an apprentice to a perfumer. And he becomes like obsessed with trying to recreate all kinds of smells. And then one day, he catches the scent of a virgin, and he wants to recreate that smell, and he will stop at nothing to do so. The atmosphere in this book is really something else. The way that the setting is like brought to life through smells and scents is just absolutely incredible. And the main character in here is, he's really something else, but he's an interesting character to read about. I don't think he has a lot of redeeming qualities, but he's fascinating in a horrible way. Next, we have A Ladder to the Sky by John Boyne, which is a literary fiction novel following the life of Maurice, who is handsome and charming and hungry for fame, but he is unfortunately also completely devoid of talent. And so when he decides that he wants to become a famous author, he figures he can just steal a story from someone else, and that will make him famous, because why not? The main character in here is terrible. Like, he is the worst, but he's also interesting to read about. A lot of the story is actually told through the perspective of a lot of the people around him, and I think that's an interesting way to tell this story. It's like told through the eyes of different people that he comes into contact with, and he is just relentless in his pursuit of what he wants, and he is so incredibly entitled, and he's so infuriating, but he does make for like an interesting character to read about. Like, he's just fascinating. Lastly, for books with unlikable characters, we actually have what I would call my favorite book of all time. It's The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is filled with horrible, unlikable people. And I think this is really interesting because every time I reread this book, I sort of debate with myself who is the worst person in here, but that you could make the argument that any of them are like terrible. If you don't know, the story in here is about a group of eccentric college students at this university in Vermont, and they study under this eccentric Greek professor, and the story is basically about what happens when they turn on one of their own. I do think one of the reasons I love this book so much is because the characters in here are deeply flawed people, and the way that they are written is just excellent. Like, I love the writing style of Donna Tartt, and I honestly just love this whole book. I am obsessed with it, and yeah, it's my favorite. It's so good, but the characters in here really are like terrible. Secondly, though, we're going in the opposite direction of what I just talked about, which I feel like actually captures my reading taste very well, because on one hand, I love reading about unlikable, detestable people, but on the other hand, I also love a good book with a wholesome creature main character. This is something that I've discovered in recent years that I really like. I feel like I sort of discovered it with the rise of cozy fantasy. Like, that's where I figured out that I really like this. And the story doesn't have to be cozy necessarily. It can be a little bit dark as well, but it has to have a certain kind of like wholesomeness to it. The first two books that I have to mention here are these books. So we have Legends and Lattes and Brigands and Breaknives by Travis Baldree, and these are in the same series. So Legends and Lattes is the first book, and Brigands and Breaknives is the sequel. In Legends and Lattes, we follow a battle-weary orc who is retiring from her adventuring days, and she wants to open up a coffee shop in a place where no one knows what coffee is. And that's basically the story. Obviously, the main character in here is an orc, but she's also very sweet and just like a lovely person. In Brigands and Breaknives, we follow a bookseller Ratkin who actually moves to the same town as the orc in Legends and Lattes, and she wants to start over there by opening up a new bookshop. But then she gets there and she opens this bookshop and it isn't exactly what she wanted, and so she ends up going out one night and getting drunk, and she falls asleep in a cart, and when she wakes up, that cart is on its way away from this town, and so she sort of accidentally goes on an adventure. This definitely leans more into the cozy adventure side of things, but it definitely has a cozy edge to it still, and the main character in here is really sweet despite the fact that she swears like a sailor. Like, it's really funny, and she's just a lovely character to follow. And both of these books just, they're very comforting to me. Secondly, I of course have to mention Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen, which is a book that I will put into any video that I can. I feel like I talk about this book a lot, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it does follow this main character, who I guess technically is like a creature because she's a garlic person, and the story is all about her going on an adventure because she has to confront a vampire that moves into the neighborhood. And despite her being very anxious, she's also quite brave, and this is just such a lovely graphic novel, and I just love it. Then we have Greenteeth by Molly O'Neill, which follows a lake monster, and I don't know how wholesome you can really call a monster, but her name is also Jenny, so how monstrous can she really be? This is a historical fiction fantasy book, and the story is about how this monster meets this witch when the witch gets thrown into her lake. And instead of eating the witch, she decides that she's gonna save her. And through various events, they end up going on a quest together to stop this evil force that is taking over the village. And I would say that the main character in here, like the monster, gets more and more wholesome throughout the book. And even though she's described as like actually pretty terrifying, I feel like the story is really wholesome because it's really about her finding friendship in unlikely places and sort of finding friendship in a life that has been very lonely. It's sort of the same vibe with this next one, actually. It's Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, which follows a changeling who, on the day of her birth, was taken away by the fairies, and she has spent her whole life being raised by them and living with them. And then one day she is asked by the fairies to do something for them, which, you know, sounds easy, but then it's actually not that easy. Then we meet her centuries later as she is basically protecting this tower. And there is a curse on the tower, and her job is to uphold that curse. And so things get a little bit complicated when this knight comes to lift the curse, and the story is all about that. I don't want to say too much because it's a very short book, but yeah. There is something in this tower that is interesting. This is very whimsical and fairy tale-esque, and even though it's short, it's magical, and I really liked meeting our main character, Toadling, and just seeing her story. I just really enjoyed it. My only complaint about this book is really that I wish it was longer. Like, I wish it was a full-length novel because I really liked it. I do really like these kinds of, like, creature books, both when they're a little bit darker and when they're on the cozier side of things. I don't know what it is about it, but I really enjoyed it and I really want to read more. I think my next book like this that I'm gonna read is a book that a lot of you have recommended to me, actually, Shady Hollow, which follows a detective fox. And that sounds amazing. The next thing on my list is a thing that I also feel like I've sort of recently discovered that I like. So I actually haven't read that many books with this in it, but it's books set in graveyards. It makes a lot of sense to me that I would like this because personally I really love going to visit graveyards, but I don't think I really realized how much I could love it in a book until I read Freshwater for Flowers by Valérie Perrin. This is a book that I absolutely loved every single page of. Like, I just love this book so much, but it's also unfortunately one of those books where it's so hard to summarize it in a way that like gives you the idea of how good it really is. But the story basically follows this woman who is a caretaker at a cemetery, and she lives there. And the story is just about her life and some of the people who come into her life, grave diggers and gardeners and all kinds of different people, but also a man who one day comes to the graveyard to deposit his mother's ashes on a grave of a stranger. So the mother has like written in her will that she wants her ashes deposited there, and that's also a part of the story, but there's a lot more to it, so just like trust me with this. It's so good. Like, it's such a good story. It's also really moving, and it is a character-driven book, I would say, but there is a lot of stuff that happens to the main character, and she's had quite a life. And the backdrop of this cemetery is just so good. And like the house where she lives, like the way that I picture it in my head is just amazing. And it's so well done that like if this was a real place, I would want to move there. Which probably says more about me than the book maybe, but it just like the backdrop of that is just amazing. And I love it. I have read another book recently that also has a graveyard as a setting. It's Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. And I didn't end up loving this book, probably because the writing is quite experimental and I couldn't quite get into it. But I do think that the setting of the graveyard in this is actually excellent. And it's a slightly darker, more absurd take on it, and we have like ghosts and stuff. But the setting of that book is like, it's something that I still think about a lot. I do actually think about this book quite a lot, even though I didn't end up loving it. I think it's objectively an interesting book, but personally, for my tastes, it wasn't like a 5-star read, but the setting of the graveyard really added a lot to the story. I would actually love to know if any of you have any recommendations for books with this kind of setting, because I would like to read more. I have read a few others like back in the day, but I really want to find more of them. So if you know of any, please let me know. I'm not against reading like fantasy books set in graveyards, but I think what I'm leaning more towards is more like the way it is in Freshwater for Flowers. So more leaning sort of literary fiction, historical fiction, that kind of vibe. So if anyone has any recommendations, please let me know because I would like to read more. I could probably do a little bit of research and find some books, and I haven't really done that yet, but if you've read a good book with like a graveyard or a cemetery as a setting, let me know. Second to last, the next specific thing that I really like in books is another one of those things that I know not everyone likes, it's not for everyone, but I can get really into it. And it's what I like to call no plot, all vibes. Which I feel like is pretty self-explanatory. It's the kinds of books where you just have to like go with the flow of the book. And even if there is a plot, it might be a little bit vague and the writing might be like sort of dreamlike. And I feel like in these books, at least the ones that I like that are like this, they have a lot of atmosphere to them, but not a lot happens, really. Now, I don't like all of these kinds of books, and I'm not sure I can totally pinpoint what it is that makes me like one but not the other. I think maybe it's a combination of the writing style and like my mood when I pick the book up, but I do have 4 books here that sort of fit into this that I really like. The most well-known of these that I've read is probably Bunny by Mona Awad, which follows this main character who is a part of a highly selective writers program at this university. And in her very small class, there are these girls who are very strange and they're very close to each other, and they all call each other Bunny. And the main character hates them. But then one day she's invited to one of their events, I guess, and this changes everything. This is a really weird book, but I really liked it without being able to really pinpoint why. I think the writing worked really well for me. I think that the main character is quite interesting and these girls are quite interesting. And I think that the way this book works is that it is kind of like vague and very atmospheric, but it gets more and more vague and weird as we go, and I think that structure worked really well for me. And yeah, I think about this book a lot, even though I don't really know how to explain it or talk about it really, and I don't know if I fully understood it, but it does kind of feel like a fever dream that builds up. And yeah, definitely not for everyone. If you can't get into the vibes of this one, there's like nothing for you in here. Secondly, we have Catherine House by Elisabeth Thomas. And this is again set at an elite school, and it follows this girl who gets into the school, and it's set like in the school is in the rural woods of Pennsylvania. And it's very prestigious, but it's also the kind of school where if you go, you can't leave for 3 years. So there are no holidays and you can't leave at all. So if you get in, you have to just go and stay there. But this place also produces some of the best minds in the world. Of course, when our main character gets to the school though, she realizes that something darker was going on. And the book is technically a little bit about trying to figure out what that is, but this really is the kind of book that is all vibes, because the main character is sort of apathetic and very passive, so it almost feels like everything that happens in the book just sort of washes over her, and she doesn't really do a lot. And I think that that can be quite infuriating for some people, but if you can go along with the vibes and the atmosphere, it is quite interesting, I think. Definitely not for everyone, but for some reason I really liked this one. And I do think that if you like Bunny, there is a higher chance that you will like this. But I don't think everyone that likes Bunny will like this. So, I don't know. I don't really know who to recommend this to, but I really liked it. Then we have Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid, which is a historical fiction fantasy, I guess, with a little bit of horror to it. And it follows this lady who marries a Scottish brute and basically tries to survive in his very hostile court. And yes, this is a retelling of like the story of Lady Macbeth, but to be honest, when I read this book, I completely disregarded that, and I think that helped me in being able to enjoy this book. This is like 80% vibes and atmosphere, to be honest. But I really liked those vibes and the atmosphere, and I actually really enjoyed following the main character trying to navigate her way through everything that happens in here. It's a little dark and spooky, and there is like a magical element in here that is quite creepy, but I really enjoyed it. But this really is one of those books where, like, if you don't like the writing and you don't like the vibes, you're not gonna like this, because that's the whole book, really. A lot of the books that I read that are like this are actually more like dark and weird, but this next one is not as dark and weird. It has a lighter feel to it, but it's still like very much about the vibes. It's Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami, which is actually one of my favorite books. It's a Japanese translation, and it follows this woman in her 30s who one day, when she's at a bar, she runs into her old high school teacher. And the story is just about them becoming friends, and it's all about how their relationship evolves throughout the book. Honestly, this book is mostly just about these two people going to different places and eating different kinds of food. Like, that's the plot, if you want to call it that. But I really like the story about these two people. It's kind of weird, but there was something moving about it to me. And I think one of the reasons this book really worked for me, it's actually one of my all-time favorites. I really need to reread this, actually. But I loved it because of the writing, and because it's a story about sort of the beauty of ordinary moments, but then it's also the story about these two people and their friendship and love. And it is strange and really mostly all about the vibes, but it's so good. The last specific thing I have for you today is something that I'm just gonna call "This is ridiculous," but in the best way. And it's kind of hard to explain what this is really, but it is books that are kind of ridiculous and over the top, but not too much. Like, it has to hit that perfect balance. And I actually think it can be really difficult to write these kinds of books because you don't want it to be too much and just like the perfect amount where it's just fun and entertaining, but not actually so ridiculous that it's distracting. If you picture slightly silly people suddenly dashing about, that is the vibe that I'm thinking of. And it can work for any genre really, but it does have to hit that sweet spot. It has to be like balanced. And when I find a book that has this in it that really works for me, it is like peak entertainment. I do think that this sweet spot can be different for different readers. Like, we have different tolerances for how ridiculous things can be and how over the top. But the four books that I have here hit it perfectly for me. Like this one, Empire of Shadows by Jacqueline Benson. This is a historical fiction adventure romance set in Victorian times, where we follow this main character who dreams of becoming an archaeologist. But she is also a woman in this time, and so she can only get so far. But then she comes across this map to an ancient lost city, and she sees this as her opportunity to make a great discovery, so she decides to go after it. But unfortunately, there are also these ruthless villains that know of the existence of this map and who also want to find this place. That makes things a little bit complicated, and it ends up sort of becoming a race for who can get there first. But she decides to go into the jungle, but she can't go alone, so she recruits the help of this maverick surveyor who knows the jungle really well, but he also cannot for the life of him keep his shirt on. And they start bickering immediately, and it is kind of like over the top, but it's also so much fun. I love a good adventure book, so of course I loved that aspect of this book, but I also really like the characters in here, and I actually really like the romance in here, which is really saying something because usually I don't care for like romance in books really at all. But I do think the fact that it is a little bit over the top is one of the reasons that it works for me in here. Like everything is sort of over the top and it's just a lot of fun. I do think this is one of those books where you kind of have to take it for what it is, but if you can, it is just like so entertaining. Then we have The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel, which definitely has a darker edge to it. This is a historical fiction mystery set in Edinburgh in 1888, where a violinist gets murdered in a locked room. And there are all of these like black magic symbols on the walls of the crime scene. And we follow a Scotland Yard detective who gets sent to investigate this case, and he has to team up with this Scottish detective who actually believes in this stuff, like the occult and everything, which of course the Englishman finds ridiculous. But then there is something really weird about the case, and the more they investigate, the weirder it gets. If you imagine an uptight Englishman being teamed up with a slightly crazy Scottish person, and they are running through the mists of Edinburgh at night, like that's very much the vibe of this book. I actually think that happens several times throughout this. And it's definitely over the top and a little ridiculous, but it's so much fun. And it's actually a very atmospheric read, and the mystery is like really atmospheric, and I liked all of the occult stuff, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. This is also the first book in a series, and I haven't read the other ones yet, but I really want to. And yeah, very, very atmospheric, this one. Speaking of ridiculous detectives, we also have A Meditation on Murder by Robert Thorogood, which follows a very British detective who works on a tropical island, and he gets called to the scene of a crime where, again, someone has been murdered in a locked room, and it's like the leader of this spiritual retreat, and it's very much one of those like impossible crime. This detective literally walks around this tropical island working in a full woolen suit. So a full wool suit on a tropical island. And he also hates the sand, which to be honest, I can sympathize with because I also hate sand because it gets everywhere. But he's kind of like grumpy and very sort of, again, a little uptight, but he's also kind of sweet, and it's very sweet how the other people he works with treat him, and it's just a lot of fun. It's the kind of book where, again, you have to take it for what it is, but if you can, it will make you chuckle a lot. Lastly, we have The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. And I've actually read 3 books in this series now because I just enjoy them so much, but this is the first book in the series. And it's set in Victorian England, and in here we meet a very proper Victorian lady who also is a thief, but she only ever robs people in the proper way because of course there are proper ways of doing these kinds of things. The world that we see in here is set in Victorian England, but with magic. So we, for example, have flying houses that are kind of like pirate ships, and the story is about what happens when an assassin is sent after the main character. But this assassin is also very handsome, and that is very, very distracting. This is very much a romance book, but there is a lot of other stuff that happens in here as well. And all of it is kind of over the top, and you just have to kind of go with it, but if you can, it's so much fun, and it's really funny. I think that these books make fun of Victorian society and like the rules of it in a really funny way. But every time I talk about these books, I do feel like I have to mention the fact that like the writing style is very specific. So if you read the first 30 pages of this book and you don't like it, you're not gonna like the rest of it because all of it is like that. But if you like it, you can just read these books and have a great time, I think. As you can see, this kind of thing can really work in like mysteries or romances or historical fiction or adventure, and it's just so much fun, and it's so satisfying for me when I find a book that like hits that spot. And it's just like the perfect amount of silly that I find so enjoyable. Now, I do have even more of these kinds of specific things that I like in books. I have like a whole list going, so if you ever want a part 3, let me know. But that was everything that I had for you today. I would of course love to know if you like these things that I've mentioned in this video, or if you don't like them, or if you have anything else that is very specific that you've thought of that you really like in books. I would love to hear about it all in the comments. That was kind of it for today though. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!